as we get you all the information that you need to take on the day today. We'll start with the world news coming up for you. This is Community Radio Network's The World News, read by Shabnam Madgil. Saddled with negative approval ratings and trailing former President Trump in the latest polling average of their general election rematch, President Biden went for the jugular in prime time yesterday as he delivered the State of the Union address with 8 months to go until the November showdown. Early and often, he took aim at Trump, whom he only referred to as his predecessor, and also fired numerous salvos at Republican lawmakers sitting directly in front of him as the president delivered his address to a joint session of Congress. He never mentioned Trump by name, but was quick to go after him and the last administration, as he referred to during the State of the Union address, hammering Trump on everything from Russia policy to abortion, taxes, and the January 6th storming of the U.S. Capitol. In his third State of the Union address yesterday, Joe Biden did what was once unthinkable, directly challenged the Supreme Court justices about one of their opinions, addressing them personally. He brought up the conservative majority's landmark reversal of Roe v. Wade. He had begun to read and accept of the decision when he began a brief aside, looking right at the justices sitting in the front row. During his State of the Union speech last night, President Biden announced an emergency military mission to construct a port in the Mediterranean Sea on Gaza's coast to get humanitarian aid in. There are worse places for a president to introduce the themes of his final campaign than in a primetime nationally televised speech before a joint session of Congress. So that's precisely what President Biden did last night, capitalizing on the pomp and circumstance of his annual State of the Union address and the massive media spotlight that it commands to frame the coming general election clash with his predecessor, former President Trump, as an existential struggle over reproductive rights, America's place in the world, the future of the middle class, and even the integrity of U.S. democracy itself. The mention of age and of other people who've lived just as long was pointed. Trump at 77 is only 4 years younger than Joe Biden at 81. After entering the House chamber, he took more than 8 minutes to meander to the lectern. His white hair may have looked thinner than it did the last time most Americans tuned in. His gait may have seemed stiffer. But as soon as the president started speaking, he sounded like the same old or not so old Biden, familiar from his decades in the Senate and his years as Barack Obama's second in command. On average, 56% of Americans disapprove of Biden's performance in office. Just 38% approve. Those numbers have barely budged for years, despite the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, the passage of ambitious legislation, and the steadily improving U.S. economy. The high-octane approach was deliberate, an attempt to shatter the impression that Biden isn't up to the job because he's an octogenarian. The truth, he argued, both in what he said and how he said it, is just the opposite. The State of the Union address isn't a campaign speech. It's a presidential duty prescribed in the Constitution. Usually, commanders-in-chief running for re-election don't spend a lot of time on their competitors, but Biden did, underscoring how unusual he thinks this election will be. The speech wasn't short on policy. In fact, it's difficult to think of an issue that he did not mention. He delivered his third State of the Union address yesterday, touting his economic record and making the case for a second term in an hour-long address that highlighted his Bidenomics policies, reminding Americans about the country's path out of the pandemic. Departed from his own script numerous times during last night's State of the Union address to talk about economic issues, he blasted big banks for credit card fees, inserted a real-world example of shrinkflation, teased GOP colleagues about infrastructure money headed to their districts. President Biden delivering his State of the Union address before a joint session of Congress last night, a speech coming in just more than an hour, directed squarely at Republicans and without naming him former President Trump. President Biden has ordered the U.S. military to establish a temporary port in Gaza for aid deliveries as famine warnings multiplied after 5 months of Israeli offensive. The U.S. military will build this temporary port on Gaza's Mediterranean coast to receive humanitarian aid by sea, said President Biden in his State of the Union speech last night. Planning for the operation, initially based on the island of Cyprus, he does not envision deployment of U.S. military personnel in Gaza. Israel will push on with its offensive against Hamas, including into the southern Gaza city of Rafah, despite growing international pressure to stop, said Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Palestinians in Gaza have had to ensure an intense bombing campaign in the northern parts, the central area, and the city of Khan Yunis, where the military headquarters and armored vehicles of the Israeli military are still based. The Israeli military says that a review of the February 29 tragedy at a humanitarian aid convoy, which left more than 100 Palestinians dead, found that troops fired precisely towards suspects who approached them. Hamas said its delegation had left Cairo yesterday amid ongoing negotiations on a ceasefire accord in Gaza that mediators hope to achieve before Ramzan next week. Hamas's delegation has voiced dissatisfaction with the Israeli responses so far on a Gaza ceasefire plan and left Cairo for consultations with the movement's leadership in Qatar. The U.S. military has said it carried out a fresh airdrop of aid into Gaza, its third in less than a week. Jordan's military has said aircrafts from Belgium, Egypt, France, and the Netherlands had also taken part in the latest U.S.-Jordanian operation. Allies of former President Trump held meetings with top officials in Israel last week to discuss the current conflict in Gaza. The visit, led by Keith Kellogg, a leading national security advisor to the former president, who also served in the Trump administration, comes as the presumptive Republican nominee has offered few specifics on how he would approach the war in Gaza, which has emerged in the U.S. as a divisive political issue in a presidential election year. Donald Trump is set to complete his takeover of the Republican National Committee today when GOP officials vote to install the former president's handpicked leadership team, including his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump. Expelled New York Congressman George Santos, who made a surprise appearance at the State of the Union, announced he's running for office again in 2024. And a number of fertility clinics in Alabama are expected to resume in vitro fertilization treatments after Governor Kay Ivey signed a bill into law meant to protect providers of the procedure and their employees. An independent report commissioned by the city of Uvalde into the deadly 2022 school shooting found that none of the city's officers violated department policy, infuriating families of some of the 19 children and 2 teachers who were killed in one of the deadliest classroom shootings in U.S. history. An investigation that Uvalde city leaders ordered into the Robb Elementary School shooting had, of course, prompted shouts of cowards during the city council meeting yesterday and causing several family members of the victims to angrily walk out. Sweden officially became the 32nd member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization yesterday after its Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson deposited its document of accession with the U.S. government, the treaty's caretaker. The Nordic country's admission to the Mutual Defense Pact formally ends its over 2 centuries of military non-alignment. Sweden became this 36th member of NATO in the shadow of the war in Ukraine, ending 2 centuries of official non-alignment and capping 2 years of torturous diplomacy. Later in the day, Swedish Prime Minister attended the annual State of the Union address by President Biden, who's been struggling to persuade the rival Republican Party to approve new aid to Ukraine. Haiti's government said it was extending a state of the emergency and nighttime curfew to try and curb violent gang attacks that have paralyzed the capital of Port-au-Prince in a fierce battle for political power. And the U.S. and Turkey are set to kick off comprehensive talks to discuss if the NATO allies can move beyond deep-rooted disagreements over issues such as Syria and Ankara's close ties with Russia. Senior U.S. and Turkish officials are set to meet at the State Department for several rounds of talks focusing on topics spanning Syria, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, defense cooperation, energy, counterterrorism, and the Israel-Hamas war. The conversations, dubbed the strategic mechanism, will set the stage for a meeting today between U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. More than 2 years into their wartime alliance, the bond between the U.S. and Ukraine is showing signs of wear and tear, giving way to mutual frustration and a feeling that the relationship might be stuck in a bit of a rut. It is the stuff that often strains relationships, finances, different priorities, and complaints about not being heard. For the Pentagon, the exasperation comes down to a single recurring issue. U.S. military strategists, including Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, believe that Ukraine needs to concentrate its forces on one big fight at a time. Senior Ukrainian officials in a meeting with a Chinese regional envoy pressed Kyiv's plan to end the 2-year conflict with Russia and presented what they said was evidence of North Korean weaponry supplied to Moscow. Ukraine's former military chief has been appointed the country's new ambassador to the United Kingdom, a month after he was sacked as head of the the armed forces by President Zelensky. He announced that he has approved the appointment to one of Ukraine's most important diplomatic positions. Britain is a key supporter of Ukraine in its war with Russia. And British Foreign Secretary David Cameron has strongly advocated the delivery of long-range weapons to Ukraine during a visit to Berlin yesterday. The European Commission has launched a new partnership with Mauritania to promote legal migration and combat smuggling and human trafficking, according to the European Union Authority. Mauritania is also to be supported in the reception of refugees. And dozens of farmers in Spain have attempted to storm the regional parliament of the autonomous community of Navarre during a protest rally over fair prices. Poland's government blamed hooligans and provocateurs for this week's violent clashes during farmer protests that left many police officers injured and vowed to prosecute the offenders. The UN chief is urging Sudan's warring parties to halt hostilities during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, warning that the nearly year-long conflict threatens the country's unity and could ignite regional instability of dramatic proportions. More than 280 Nigerian school pupils have been abducted in the northwestern town of Kuriga. They were in assembly ground when dozens of gunmen on motorcycles rode through the school. The students between the ages of 8 and 15 were taken away along with the teacher. And Iran is responsible for the physical violence that led to the death of Mahsa Amini in September of 22 and sparked nationwide protests against the country's mandatory headscarf or hijab laws and its ruling theocracy. This according to a UN fact-finding mission today. The stark pronouncement came in a wide-ranging initial report submitted to the UN Human Rights Council by the fact-finding mission on Iran. Three-time world champion Max Verstappen shut out the noise surrounding his Red Bull team to clock the fastest lap in opening practice at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Community Radio Networks. North Korea showed off its long-range artillery system, thousands of weapons that it could use to strike the south with little warning while causing tens of thousands of casualties. The North's artillery drills come at a time of heightened tension on the Korean peninsula as the U.S. and South Korea conduct their annual Freedom Shield exercise, which the South Korean military said will focus on deterring North Korea's nuclear threats. North Korea has used the COVID-19 pandemic to seal up its northern border with China, according to new images from a leading human rights group. And today marks 10 years since the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, as Malaysian authorities say they may consider reopening an investigation into one of the most enduring aviation mysteries. It was on today's date, less than 40 minutes after takeoff, that the Boeing 777 aircraft from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing stopped transmitting location data. Upon exiting Malaysian airspace, it veered off course towards the Indian Ocean, with satellite data indicating the aircraft continued flying for hours, and the disappearance of 239 people led to multiple international search efforts. The creator of Japan's hugely popular and influential Dragon Ball comics and anime cartoons, Akira Toriyama, has died at the age of 68. His first serialized in 1984 Dragon Ball is one of the best-selling manga franchises of all times and has spawned countless anime series, films, and video games. A rare and endangered red panda was among 87 live animals that were seized by Thai customs officials at Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi airport. And the animals were found hidden in the checked luggage of 6 Indian nationals who were attempting to smuggle them out of the country and fly to Mumbai. New Zealand pace bowler Ben Sears will make his Test debut against an unchanged Australia in the second and final match in Christchurch as the Black Caps look to square the series 1-1. And on the fifth test, day 2, skipper Rohit Sharma and Shubman Gill's splendid hundreds gave India complete control of the fifth test against England, despite a late batting collapse that saw the hosts end day 2 at 473 for 8 today. Kuldeep Yadav took 5 wickets to bundle England out for 218, with India's batsmen starting strongly on a dominant opening day for the hosts in the fifth test at the Himachal Pradesh Cricket Association Stadium in Dharamsala. And Indian authorities today said they are in talks with Russia's government about the return of Indian citizens who were duped into working for the Russian army, a day after a federal investigation agency said it broke up a human trafficking network that lured people to Russia under the pretext of giving them jobs. Several Indian nationals have been duped into working in the Russian army. UK Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has announced in the budget that £1 million of government cash will be used to build a memorial to Muslims from India and elsewhere who fought for the British in the two world wars. Britain's first such memorial to Muslims will be built by World War's Muslim Memorial Trust. In the two world wars, more than 750,000 Muslims served in the Indian and Allied armies, of whom approximately 147,000 were killed. The plans are drawn up and planning permission has been obtained. In this news out of London, Prime Minister Modi expressed delight at President Draupadi Murmu's Rajya Sabha nomination of philanthropist and author Sudha Murthy, calling it a powerful testament to our Nari Shakti, and delighted that the President of India has nominated Sudha Murthy ji to the Rajya Sabha. Her contributions to diverse fields, including social work, philanthropy and education, have been immense as well as inspiring. A junior commissioned officer of the army was taken from his home in Manipur's Thubal district by anti-social elements today. And Delhi, which was the most polluted city in India in January, showed improvement in February and occupied the 14th rank in the country, but it was still severely polluted, according to an analysis by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. The Badrinath Kedarnath Temple Committee has announced that the doors of the 11th Jyotirlinga Shri Kedarnath Dham will open for pilgrims on the 10th of May, and the announcement was made on the auspicious occasion of Mahashivaratri today. While thanking world leaders who congratulated him on assuming office, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif responded to Indian Prime Minister Modi in a notably restrained manner. The Premier's succinct message, "Thank you for felicitations on my election as the Prime Minister of Pakistan," mirrored Mr. Modi's own coolly worded congratulations a few days prior, marking a clear contrast to their interactions from April of 2022. Also, President Arif Alvi has been presented with a farewell guard of honor in Islamabad the day before the presidential election. It is Mahmood Khan Achakzai who's written a letter to the ECP seeking postponement of the presidential elections. And PPP Chairman Bilawal Bhutto Zardari met the newly elected Punjab Chief Minister Maryam Nawaz in Lahore and congratulated the latter on assuming office and discussed a strategy for the presidential elections. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif held a dinner reception as part of a campaign for Asif Ali Zardari for the presidential poll last night. Senator Mushahid Hussain Sayyid has called for the ex-Premier Imran Khan's release from jail and the allocation of reserve seats to the SIC, the Sunni Ittihad Council, the new home of the PTI-backed winning candidates. Islamabad High Court has asked if the authorities sought permission from Prime Minister Imran Khan before converting his Banigala residence into a sub-jail. The former First Lady stated that she doesn't feel secure at the house where she claimed to have been confined alone as unidentified persons roamed around the place. PPP Chairman Bilawal Bhutto Zardari has said that the presidential nominee and his father Asif Ali Zardari will have a role similar to the one that the Queen of England had in the UK. While addressing the media after meeting of the coalition government, the former foreign minister said that it would be the first time that a civilian would hold the presidential office twice. The stakes were high as Karachi Kings and Islamabad United locked horns in the most important HBL Pakistan Super League fixture so far at the Pindi Cricket Stadium yesterday. And ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have in the financial news in the world news for you. I do have the financial news coming up for you. Just stay with me right here, and it's coming up next.
Where's the ghost?
You have already heard the world news. Well, now I do have your financial news coming up for today, which is Friday, the 8th of March. Wishing all the ladies out there very, very happy International Women's Day. Let's start with your foreign currency exchange rate. We do have the Indian rupee at 82.68, Pakistani rupee 279.24, the Bangladeshi taka at 109.72, Sri Lankan rupee 307.50, the Nepalese rupee at 132.35. The British pound is at 0.78, the euro at 0.91, the Canadian dollar 1.34, the Australian dollar 1.50, Mexican peso 16.81, Chinese yuan 7.19, Japanese yen 146.66, Russian ruble 90.90, Thai baht 35.33, and the Turkish lira at 31.96. The February jobs report has just been released just a couple of minutes ago, and it is showing 275,000 new jobs that have been added, and that has just come out. U.S. stock futures have held steady today after a strong rally, with all eyes on this crucial monthly U.S. jobs report that could shift the needle on timing of interest rate cuts. S&P 500 futures little changed on the heels of notching another record close, while Dow Jones Industrial Average futures slid roughly 0.2%. Futures in the tech-heavy Nasdaq 100 fell 0.1% after yesterday's sharp gain. The Gap has reported fourth quarter results that beat analysts' estimates on both the top and bottom lines. The retail company reported revenue of $4.3 billion, exceeding expectations of $4.21 billion. Furthermore, Gap's adjusted earnings per share came in at 0.49, outpacing analyst projections of 0.23 per share. Americans haven't felt this optimistic about the housing market in nearly 2 years, but it's home sellers who have anything to be happy about. And Fannie Mae's gauge on housing sentiment increased slightly, making the third consecutive month of improved confidence in the highest level since March of 22. The boost was driven by increased optimism among home sellers as market conditions continue to tip in their favor now. Oil eased as a brief outage on North America's Keystone pipeline failed to shake prices out of what is set to be the smallest weekly range in years. Global benchmark Brent earlier rose towards $84 a barrel before erasing those gains. U.S. benchmark West Texas Intermediate slipped away from the $80 mark. Less than a week after Tesla CEO Elon Musk sued OpenAI, alleging the influential AI startup abandoned its original mission of working for the public good, the company struck back. But by attempting to prove Musk was along for the ride, OpenAI sullied itself, and it echoes the dark aspects of big tech's legacy: grand pronouncements, building community, making information free, that mass profit motives, and justify social harms. Amazon is bringing generative AI to its shopping app via its new Rufus chatbot. And we do have Rivian surging after the electric vehicle maker unveiled 3 new EVs and said it would save over $2 billion from pausing production at its Georgia plant. Rivian Automotive was up more than 13% following that news. A renewed push targeting TikTok is gaining momentum on Capitol Hill, where several previous efforts to ban the widely popular video sharing app over concerns about its parent company's ties to China have stalled in the past. It's owned by the China-based company ByteDance. TikTok is one of the most widely used apps in the U.S. with more than 150 million monthly users, and its meteoric rise over the past several years has been accompanied by warnings from national security officials and lawmakers that China's communist government could gain access to its vast trove of data and use that information to spy on Americans. Donald Trump may have rage-posted his way through President Biden's State of the Union address on Truth Social, but his social media site crashed for many before Biden even entered the House chamber, with technical issues lingering for at least an hour before and into his remarks. Dozens of attorneys general from across the country, including Pennsylvania, Michigan, New Jersey, and Delaware, are urging Meta to investigate the increase in social media account takeovers on its platforms. Account takeovers have been on the rise. Hackers lock individuals from their accounts and change their passwords, then steal personal information, scam contacts, and post harmful content. A well-known cheese maker, Wisconsin's Sargento Foods, is being affected by a series of recalls linked to a California dairy company, Rizzo Lopez Foods, due to a deadly listeria outbreak. Sargento Foods notified certain food service customers that it was recalling shredded cheese from Rizzo Lopez that has been distributed as an ingredient. The recall involved a limited amount of food service and ingredients products and involved cheese obtained from the California company. It did not involve cheese sold to consumers, but business customers. You could soon be getting your half-price appetizers and short stack of pancakes in the same building as Applebee's and IHOP, both owned by Dine Brands Inc., could soon have dual-branded location. The news was shared by Dine Brands CEO John Payton during an earnings call from the company last week. The merged restaurants would share a back-of-house and blended front-of-house for customers looking to get a chicken fajita roll-up and a Western omelette. And that is this collaboration between Applebee's and IHOP. The utility provider Xcel Energy has said yesterday its facilities appeared have played a role in igniting that massive wildfire in the Texas Panhandle that grew to the largest blaze in state history. Texas officials have said they are still investigating the cause of the fire that has burned nearly 1,700 square miles and destroyed hundreds of structures. The Minnesota-based company said in a statement that it disputes claims that it acted negligently in maintaining and operating infrastructure. Following a years-long investigation, the Texas Education Agency takes control of the largest charter school network in Texas. IDEA schools had been under investigation for years for things like using taxpayer money to spend millions to lease a private jet, to buy a boutique hotel in Cameron County, and leasing a luxury suite for San Antonio Spurs games. And Nicole Hill with the Texas AFT notes that the Houston ISD was taken over by the state last year based on standardized test scores at a couple of high schools, both of which had by then improved. The first whistleblower complaint on IDEA came out in 2015. Collin College is getting nearly $500,000 for a job training program. The $491,000 grant is from the Texas Workforce Commission's Skills Development Fund. And some people have been arrested yesterday in Garland, where a group of pro-Palestinian protesters blocked public streets and the entrances to the General Dynamics plant. Police got the first calls and arrived to find cars blocking both north and southbound Glenbrook, where there are two entrances into that plant. The protesters' statement says that the Garland plant builds bombs like the one dropped on Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza in October, killing more than 100 people. Fort Worth City Council heard a presentation this week on a proposed street maintenance fee to fix its roads. Fort Worth Assistant City Manager says the initial plan is to charge $9.22 per single-family homes and $5.65 per multi-family units. An exhibit at the Perot Museum of Nature and Science opens today that shows how NASA is gathering information from the rover and helicopter on Mars. Mission Mars Perseverance rover includes replicas of NASA's Perseverance rover and Ingenuity helicopter. Billions of migratory birds will be flying through Texas this spring, and wildlife advocates are asking all of us to do a small part in making sure their passage is as safe as possible. The Lights Out Texas campaign calls for Texans to turn off any unnecessary outdoor lights that might interfere with the birds' flights, as they most often travel at night. We are going live. Whether you're in town and want to multitask or couldn't make it to Austin, we want you to be a part of the SX message. Watch daily keynote presentations, featured sessions, exclusive South by Southwest studio interviews, and music showcase. And you can catch some incredible programming streaming from today until the 16th and learn more about South by Southwest. It's not a question of if Oppenheimer will win an Academy Award this Sunday. It's more whether director Christopher Nolan will need a little red wagon or a Brinks truck to carry home all the golden treasures. With a leading 13 nominations, Nolan's atomic bomb thriller rolls into the 96th Oscar ceremony that is airing this Sunday as a heavy favorite to pick up some serious hardware from below-the-line categories to the big deal races like Best Actor, Supporting Actor, and Picture. At least Best Actress could could be interesting, with previous winner Emma Stone of Poor Things versus newcomer Lily Gladstone of Killers of the Flower Moon for all the marbles. Ariana Grande is just hours away from releasing her long-awaited seventh record, Eternal Sunshine, a concept album partially inspired by the sci-fi romantic drama Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And an interview for Apple Music that was posted said the 30-year-old pop star opened up about her love for the film's star, her childhood idol, Jim Carrey. Over 500 people have RSVP'd to an event in which die-hard roast beef fans will mass descend on an Arby's in Ontario, Canada, after the final remaining location in Toronto disappeared. According to the Toronto-based Lifestyle, the city used to boast several locations such as the Eaton Centre and Scarborough Town Centre shopping areas, as well as a small handful of standalone locations. However, over the past decade or so, Arby's storefronts in Toronto have been gradually closing until there were no meats to be found in the city. European stocks have notched a new record high today. Global bonds rose and gold extended its surge on expectations that U.S. jobs data this morning will cement the case for interest rate cuts in the coming months. Continuing strike action by ground staff of the German airline Lufthansa again caused numerous flight cancellations today. Around 1,000 flights cancelled today during the course of the day, especially at the Munich and Frankfurt hubs. Only 10 to 20% of the normally scheduled flights will be taking place. Germany's biggest airline has warned that these ongoing strikes by thousands of its ground staff and airport workers could hurt its earnings this quarter, after walkouts earlier this year already cost the company more than $100 million. Lufthansa Group, which owns German flag carrier Lufthansa and several smaller airlines, including Austrian Airlines and Eurowings, said it expected to suffer a bigger operating loss in the first 3 months of the year than a year ago. Australia's Great Barrier Reef is experiencing its fifth mass bleaching in just 8 years. According to the authority which monitors the health of the world's largest coral reef, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority announced today that rising ocean temperatures were causing a marine heat wave that was causing massive damage to a 1,100-kilometer long stretch of that reef. An aerial photograph showed that the affected area stretches from the Keppel Islands, 500 kilometers north of Brisbane, to Lizard Island, north of Cairns. Vietnam's ruling Communist Party has directed officials to control trade unions as the country prepares to expand workers' rights, alongside closely monitoring foreign organizations and citizens traveling abroad. And Bangkok-based Project 88, which focuses on human rights in Vietnam, said that it had obtained an internal directive issued by the Politburo of the party containing these orders today. After a season that saw 18 Mount Everest trekkers tragically lose their lives, Nepal will institute new safety requirements for the upcoming climbing season. And all climbers will be required to carry GPS tracking chips with them on the mountain to aid rescue operations. The chips will be sewn into the climbers' jackets at the start of their journeys and will be retrieved and reused when they hopefully make it back down the mountain. Reserve Bank of India and the Bank of Indonesia signed a memorandum of understanding to promote use of local currencies for bilateral transactions. And the domestic currency outperformed other emerging market currencies this year in India, buoyed by lower crude oil prices, the practice of purchasing crude in rupees, and strong services exports that have helped maintain a manageable current account deficit. It is this year that the rupee, along with the Mexican peso, among the only major emerging market currencies to have gained against the dollar, registering a 0.6% increase. In contrast, the Thai baht, the South Korean won, the Taiwanese dollar, and the Malaysian ringgit have weakened by 4.5%, 4%, 3.2%, and 2.6% respectively. Bombay Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange remaining closed today on account of Mahashivratri. And Tata Sons, the holding company of the $150 billion Tata Group, which needs to list by September of 2025, is exploring the option of restructuring its balance sheet to get an exemption from the Reserve Bank of India rule-mandated IPO. Rakesh Gangwal, the outgoing promoter of leading domestic airlines Interglobe Aviation that operates under Indigo brand, is selling 3.3% stake in the company through block deals today that could fetch him about $450 million. Singapore Telecommunications said it has sold a 0.8% stake in Bharti Airtel for $950 million to U.S. investment firm GQG Partners. And that the deal marks the latest effort by Southeast Asia's largest telecom operator to recycle capital, bringing the total to $8 billion since its strategic reset in 2021. Markets regulator SEBI barred JM Financial from taking on any new mandate to act as a lead manager to public issue of debt securities over its NBFC arm, JM Financial Products irregularities. State-owned Bank of Baroda today announced special offers for its women account holders in celebration of International Women's Day today. And it's not just a man's world when it comes to gaming. The rise of female gamers and creators in India underscores a big shift in the gaming and esports landscape. A recent report by gaming fund Lumikai has said 41% of Indian gamers are women. Surveyed 2,000 users, and its data showed an increase in the number of gamers from non-metro cities. The U.S. State Department has conveyed a clear message to Pakistan's new rulers, emphasizing the importance of collaboration with the International Monetary Fund and economic reforms for stability. The International Monetary Fund will support formulating a new economic program for Pakistan if the new government seeks one, encouraging fair resolution of all electoral disputes. Frustration is reportedly mounting in Pakistan as citizens demand the government restore full access to the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter. The platform has been partially or fully blocked since the 17th of February, following protests sparked by allegations of vote rigging in the recent general elections. The block, confirmed by Internet monitor NetBlocks, prevents many users from accessing X entirely, while others experience disruptions and slow loading times. The foreign exchange reserves of the state of Pakistan experienced a further decline of $54 million during a week, exacerbating the vulnerability of the exchange rate. And amid this falling foreign exchange reserves and uncertainty about the interest rate outlook, the stock market extended its losing streak for the third straight day, as some investors resorted to profit-taking. As a result, the benchmark KSE 100 share index saw another day of losses in a volatile session. Pakistan's trade deficit with the Middle East has narrowed in the first 7 months of the current fiscal year, mainly due to low imports of petroleum products from the region. And a consortium of Engro Fertilizers Limited, Fatima Fertilizers and 4G Fertilizers will invest over $300 million in the gas pressure enhancement facilities project at the Murray network to ensure the availability of gas for domestic urea production and safeguard the food security. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have in the financial news for you today. And let's talk about the stories from the annals of history and your social calendar coming up in the last and final segment in just a couple of minutes. And before I start this final segment of our program today, I do want to thank all the supporters of Community Radio Networks, and we have big thanks going out to Discount Power, to Houston EB5, to the Ahluwalia Law Offices, to the Wyndham Hotel in Irving, Digital X-Force, Kinzer Law, My Kolachi, the Ruchi Palace, Shri Vimal, Vimal's Venue, Eggholic, Mystic Mandala, and Flashbrush Productions. Let's get you first some stories from the annals of history that happened on today's date, which is the 8th of March. I do have all the ladies out there being wished from Community Radio Networks a very, very happy International Women's Day today. And I also have the best wishes for Mahashivratri going out for those who are celebrating that festival today. So let's talk about this stories from the annals of history that happened on the 8th of March in 1917. In Russia, the February Revolution, known as such because of Russia's use of the Julian calendar that begins on the 8th of March, when riots and strikes over the scarcity of food erupted in Petrograd. A week later, centuries of Tsarist rule in Russia ended with the abdication of Nicholas II, and Russia took a very dramatic step closer towards communist revolution. By that year, most Russians had lost faith in the leadership ability of the Tsarist regime. Government corruption was rampant, the Russian economy remained backward, and Nicholas repeatedly dissolved the Duma, the Russian parliament established after the revolution of 1905 when it opposed his will. However, the immediate cause of this revolution, the first phase of the Russian Revolution of 1917, was Russia's disastrous involvement in World War I. Militarily, Imperial Russia was no match for industrialized Germany, and Russian casualties were greater than those sustained by any nation in any previous war. And it was on today's date in 1917 that demonstrators clamoring for bread took to the streets in the Russian capital of Petrograd, now known as St. Petersburg, supported by 90,000 men and women on strike. These protesters clashed with police but refused to leave the streets. And on the 10th of the month of March, the strike spread among all of Petrograd's workers, and irate mobs of workers destroyed police stations. Several factories elected deputies to the Petrograd Soviet or the Council of Workers Committees following the model devised during the revolution of 1905. And this new provincial government, tolerated by the Petrograd Soviet, hoped to salvage the Russian war effort while ending the food shortage and many other domestic crises. It would prove a daunting task, and meanwhile Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Bolshevik Revolutionary Party, left his exile in Switzerland and crossed German enemy lines to return home and take control of the Russian Revolution. That happened on today's date in 1917. And on today's date, a year later, in 1918, the ascendant Bolshevik Party formally changed its name to the All-Russian Communist Party. Neither the first nor the last time that the party would alter its name to reflect a slight change in allegiance or direction. However, it was the birth of the Communist Party, as it is remembered to history. And with this change, the cadre that brought down both Tsar Nicholas II and the provisional government that followed his abdication announced itself to the world as a communist government, and it would unilaterally rule the emerging Union of Soviet Socialist Republics until 1991, the USSR. The Bolsheviks, Russian for members of the majority, had been the more aggressive faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, pushing for a more militant membership and explicitly endorsing the nationalization of land. And that, ladies and gentlemen, happened, and Russia became the USSR on today's date in 1918. Volkswagen, maker of the Beetle automobile, expands its product offerings to include a microbus which goes into production on today's date in the year 1950. Known officially as the Volkswagen Type 2, the Beetle was Type 1, or the Transporter, the bus was a favorite mode of transportation for hippies in the U.S. during the 1960s and became an icon of the American counterculture movement. The Volkswagen bus was reportedly the brainchild of a Dutch businessman, an importer of Beetles to the Netherlands, who saw a market for a small bus, and in 1947 sketched out his concept. Volkswagen engineers further developed the idea, and the vehicle, with its boxy utilitarian shape and rare engine, went into production. The bus eventually collected a number of nicknames, including the Kombi for combined use vehicle and the Splitty for its split windshield. In Germany, it was known as the Bully. In the US, it was referred to by some as a hippie van or a bus because it was used to transport groups of young people and their campaign gear and other supplies to concerts and anti-war rallies. Some owners painted colorful murals on their buses and replaced the Volkswagen logo on the front with a peace symbol. And according to Bug by Phil Patton, when Grateful Dead musician Jerry Garcia died in 1995, Volkswagen ran an ad featuring a drawing of the front of a bus with a tear streaming down it. The bus was only the second product offering there for Volkswagen, a company whose history dates back to the 30s Germany. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany and announced he wanted to build new roads and affordable cars for the German people. And at that time, Austrian-born engineer Ferdinand Porsche was already working on creating a small car for the masses. Hitler and Porsche later met, and the engineer was charged with designing the inexpensive mass-produced Volkswagen or People's car. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the Volkswagen bus, the icon of counterculture movement that went into production on today's date in 1950. Following Israel's withdrawal from occupied Egyptian territory, the Suez Canal is reopened to international traffic on today's date in 1957. However, the canal was so littered with wreckage from the Suez crisis that it took weeks of cleanup by Egyptian and United Nations workers before larger ships could navigate that waterway. The Suez Canal, which connects the Mediterranean as well as the Red Sea across Egypt, was completed by French engineers in 1869 and for the next 88 years remained largely under British and French control, and Europe depended on it as an inexpensive shipping route for oil from the Middle East. And it was Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser who nationalized the canal, hoping to charge tolls that would pay for construction of a massive dam on the Nile River. In response, Israel invaded in late October, and British and French troops landed, occupying the canal and other Suez territory. Under pressure from the UN, Britain and France withdrew, and the Israeli forces departed. And that month, Egypt took over control of the canal and reopened it to commercial shipping. 10 years later, Egypt shut down the canal again following the Six-Day War and Israel's occupation of the Sinai Peninsula. It remained closed for 8 years, ending when Egyptian President Anwar Sadat reopened it in 1975 after peace talks with Israel. The USS Henrico, the USS Union, and the USS Vancouver, carrying the 9th Marine Expeditionary Brigade under Brigadier General Frederick Koch, take up stations 4,000 yards of Red Beach 2, north of Da Nang. First ashore was the battalion landing team, which arrived on the beach. Wearing full battle gear and carrying M14s, the Marines were met by sightseers, South Vietnamese officers, Vietnamese girls with leis, and 4 American soldiers with a large sign stating, "Welcome, gallant Marines." General William Westmoreland, the senior U.S. military commander in Saigon, was reportedly appalled at the spectacle because he had hoped that the Marines could land without any fanfare. Within 2 hours, battalion landing team began landing at the Da Nang Air Base, and it happened on today's date in the year 1965. The 3,500 Marines deployed to secure the U.S. Air Base, freeing South Vietnamese troops up for combat, and it was ignored, and the Marines were given a hearty, conspicuous welcome when they arrived. The troops at Da Nang on the 8th of March, today's date, in the year 1965. And on the 8th of March in 1971, Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier meet for the fight of the century at the Madison Square Garden in New York City. The bout marked Ali's return to the marquee 3.5 years after boxing commissions revoked his license over his refusal to fight in the Vietnam War. It was also his first chance to win back the heavyweight championship, which had been stripped by the WBA, World Boxing Association. Both Ali and Frazier were undefeated and had won Olympic gold medals and multiple Golden Gloves championships, but their personalities were vastly different. Ali was a showboat, and his mastery of the media, his improvisational poetry during interviews, and his debonair good looks separated him from every other fighter and every other athlete of his generation. Much to his opponent's dismay, Muhammad Ali successfully painted the less popular and more reserved Frazier as an Uncle Tom and an instrument of the establishment. Leading up to the fight, the national press fawned over Ali, heralding the hero's return. He played right along while doing his best to knock Frazier off the game through mental intimidation. He even went so far as to repeatedly call Frazier a gorilla. On the night of the fight, celebrities filled the Madison Square Garden. Miles Davis was resplendent in a red suit. Frank Sinatra sat ringside, photographing the fight for a Life magazine article. It was said that billions of people were following the fight in person, on TV or on radio, and most of them were cheering for Muhammad Ali. The fight lived up to the hype. He initially landed more punches, gliding about the ring as light on his feet as he was in the prime of his career. And Frazier's punches, however, seemed to have more impact. By the 8th round, Frazier was leading 6 rounds to 2 with each judge. In the 11th round, Ali staggered but fought back, forcing the action into the 12th and 13th rounds. The fight was already decided by the 15th when Frazier handed a left hook to Ali's right chin, knocking down the champ for just the 3rd time in his illustrious career. Ali got up, but it was Frazier who won the fight by unanimous decision, retaining his title and delivering Muhammad Ali the first loss of his career. The two fighters would fight twice more, in 1974 and in 75, with Ali winning both fights. The rivalry was so intense that 20 years after their final fight, when Ali carried the torch and lit the ceremonial flame at the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, Frazier said, "If I had the chance, I would have pushed him in." Speaking to a convention of a National Association of Evangelicals in Florida, on today's date, the 8th of March in 1983, President Ronald Reagan publicly refers to the Soviet Union as an evil empire for the 2nd time in his career. He had first used the phrase in a 1982 speech at the British House of Commons. Some considered Reagan's use of the Star Wars film-inspired terminology to be brilliant democratic rhetoric. Others, including many within the international diplomatic community, denounced it as irresponsible bombast. Reagan's aggressive stance towards the Soviet Union became known as the Reagan Doctrine. He warned against what he and his supporters saw as the dangerous trend of tolerating the Soviets' buildup of nuclear weapons and attempts to infiltrate third world countries in order to spread communism. Advocating a peace through strength policy, Reagan declared that the Soviets must be made to understand we will never compromise our principles and standards, ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire. To do so would mean abandoning the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil. And that was, ladies and gentlemen, the Ronald Reagan's doctrine, the Reagan Doctrine, that was referred to on today's date in 1983 by Ronald Reagan. And on the 8th of March in 1993, the Music Television Network, and you'll know it as MTV, it airs its first episode of the animated series, and the name of that animated series was Beavis and Butthead. You all are familiar with that, which will go on to become the network's highest rated series up to that point. That, ladies and gentlemen, was Beavis and Butthead. Beavis and Butthead offered audiences rude and crude buddy humor in the tradition of the Three Stooges, Cheech and Chong, and Wayne and Garth of Saturday Night Live. In the Wayne's World movies, the titular main characters were two teenage boys living in the fictional town of Highland and attended Highland High, based on a real school in creator Mike Judge's hometown of Albuquerque in New Mexico.
4 burgers, 3 fries, and 6 milkshakes.
It was the first time that the episode of Beavis and Butthead appeared on MTV on today's date in the year 1993. And then 10 years ago, on the 8th of March in 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew members, loses contact with air traffic control less than an hour after taking off from the Kuala Lumpur airport, and then veers off course and disappears. Most of the plane and everyone on board had never been seen again. The plane departed from the Kuala Lumpur International Airport and was scheduled to arrive in Beijing's Capital International Airport. However, the aircraft's last automated position report was sent, and what turned out to be the final voice transmission from the cockpit of the doomed jetliner was relayed to air traffic controllers. "Good night, Malaysian 370. a message that suggested nothing out of the ordinary. But an hour after the flight was scheduled to land in Beijing, Malaysia Airlines announced it was missing. Prior to the aircraft's mysterious disappearance, it had been flying seemingly without incident. There were no distress signals from the plane or reports of bad weather or any technical problems. The ensuing search for Flight 370 initially was centered on the Gulf of Thailand, where the plane was traveling when radar contact was lost. Investigators looked into the possibility of terrorist involvement in the plane's disappearance after it was discovered that 2 passengers had been using stolen passports. However, this theory, at least in relation to the 2 men, soon was determined to be unlikely. The people on board this flight represented 15 nations, with more than half the passengers from China and 3 from the United States. Then, on the 15th of March, investigators said that satellite transmissions indicated that the flight had turned sharply off its assigned course and flown west over the Indian Ocean, operating on its own for 5 hours. On the 24th of March, Malaysia's Prime Minister announced the flight was presumed lost somewhere in the Indian Ocean with no survivors. As the search for the aircraft continued, with more than 24 nations, including the United States, participating in the effort, the mystery of how a commercial jetliner could vanish without a trace received global media attention. In June of 2014, Australian officials involved in the investigation said that radar records suggested that the flight likely was flying on autopilot for hours before it ran out of fuel and crashed into the southern Indian Ocean. The officials did not publicly speculate about who put the plane on autopilot after it veered off course or why, although they did indicate it was possible that the crew and passengers had become unresponsive due to hypoxia or oxygen loss sometime before the plane crashed. No explanation for what might have caused the oxygen deprivation was provided by the officials. Meanwhile, other authorities suggested one of the pilots could have deliberately flown the aircraft into the Indian Ocean on a suicide mission, although there was no conclusive evidence to support this theory. Throughout the year 2015 and 2016, debris from the aircraft washed ashore on the western Indian Ocean, but the fate of that flight remains a mystery till today. On the 17th of July in 2014, 4 months after the flight vanished, tragedy struck again for Malaysia Airlines when one of its planes was shot down over eastern Ukraine near the Russian border. All 298 people aboard the aircraft, which was also a Boeing 777, perished. European and American officials believe that Flight 17, which took off from Amsterdam and was en route to Kuala Lumpur, was downed by a Russian-made surface-to-air missile fired from territory controlled by Russian-backed separatists battling the Ukrainian government. The rebel leaders and President Putin of Russia denied any responsibility for that incident. And today, it is being remembered and maybe a probe going to be reopened for the Malaysian Airlines flight that vanished with more than 200 people aboard on today's date, 10 years ago in 2014. Today's date, the 8th of March, wishing everybody a very, very happy International Women's Day and happy Mahashivratri to all of you. We saw record rainfall yesterday at the DFW airport where we measured 2.67 inches of rain, and we have more rain on the way for this first part of today. After that, a shock to the body is on the way as sharply colder air arrives later this afternoon. It's still winter after all. Another big batch of showers and thunderstorms will work its way through the southeastern half of North Texas through noon today. An additional 1 to 2 inches of rain is possible in some areas. And we are starting off this morning with temperatures near 60 under a cloudy and rainy sky. The severity will be low with this area of showers and storms as it continues to slowly press off to the east by late morning. Temperatures will warm into the 70s as a few breaks in the clouds are possible after the noon hour today. And as we tell you about our social calendar as it stands on today's date, the 8th of March, we want to remind you all that the India Association of North Texas is celebrating International Women's Day today from 5:30 to 8. Invest in women, accelerate progress. This is happening at the Collin College Frisco Campus Conference Center on Wade Boulevard in Frisco. And we invite all of you to attend there. It's a free event. All you have to do is register at the India Association's website, iant.org. G. We do have starting today, the Mahashivaratri Mela to awaken your vibrant consciousness happening at the Radha Krishna Temple, a 3-day event. Shiva Pujan and Rudra Abhishek and Shivratri Jagran today, Kirtans, cultural program, Kanvariya, Shivratri special satsang, all happening this weekend. Also want to remind all of you that on Saturday, that is tomorrow, the light from 10:30 to noon, you're warmly invited to celebrate Shivaratri, the incarnation of the Supreme Being, the Supreme Light, the one who's the bestower of the third eye of knowledge, knower of the 3 aspects of time. And you can experience the divine powers through meditation at the Brahma Kumaris Meditation Center on Josie Lane in Farmers Branch. Please register at bkrymeditation.us. The Consulate General of India in Houston, in association with the BAPS Sri Swaminarayan Mandir and other organizations, is organizing a 1-day consular camp tomorrow from 10 to 5 at the BAPS Sri Swaminarayan Mandir. Applicants would need to register to attend the consular camp. U.S. passport holders of Indian origin who are in the process of applying for OCI cards, emergency visa, and renunciation of Indian nationality can bring in their applications with the supporting documents to the consular camp for verification, and Indian passport holders who are in the process of applying for renewal of their passport may bring their applications with supporting documents to the consular camp for verification tomorrow. Officers of the Consulate General of India in Houston will verify these applications and supporting documents, and thereafter you can send the applications to VFS. Please note that no passport renewal, visa, or OCIs will be issued on the spot tomorrow, but you can definitely make an appointment and go to the BAPS Swaminarayan Mandir tomorrow from 10 to 5 for these services at the consular camp. Also on Sunday, Prayanam Foundation presents Heart to Heart. The Prayanam Foundation hosts a yearly concert where they raise money to support various organizations and children in need. And for the past 2 years, Prayanam has raised money for organizations such as the Scottish Rite for Children and Autism Therapy Centers. And this charity concert that is happening on Sunday marks Prayanam's 3rd annual event, where they plan to use the money collected to support children and infants affected by heart and lung defects as a result of RSV and other infections. And they plan to provide nebulizers to hospitals, provide financial aid to children and families, and more to support them. It's happening this Sunday from 3 to 5:30 at the Frisco Discovery Center, and we encourage all of you to be there. This year, there's a group of very talented children who are eagerly waiting to perform for you. A myriad of singers, dancers, and instrument players who, as we are certain, will impress everyone who attends. And some of the genres that will be performed include Bollywood, pop, and Indian classical. So be prepared for an afternoon of amazing music, 3 to 5:30 this Sunday. The Mystic Mandala presenting the Festival of Colors on the 16th and the 23rd. Please get more information at dallasfestivalofcolors.com. And Texas Women's Society presenting the McKinney Asian Festival. And that's happening at the Dr. Glenn Mitchell Memorial Park on Louisiana Street in McKinney. The first ever McKinney Asian Festival. And a holistic festival. This is a 2-day market, life and wellness, on Friday and Saturday, the 29th and 30th of this month over the Easter weekend at the Cotton Mill in McKinney. We do have the Success Door supporting the Pledge Campaign Foundation presenting Fly, First Love Yourself Showcase Season 4. It's happening on the 6th of April at the Dew Event Center in Louisville from 4 to 8. And TIPS, the Texas Indo-American Physician Society, announcing their 5K and 10K run and walk. Online registration, and that is going to be at runsignup.com. It's happening on Sunday, the 7th of April at the Oak Point Preserve on Spring Creek Parkway in Plano. TIPS has this annual 5K or 10K run or walk, whatever you prefer, every year. Also want to let you all know that beginning this year, TIPS NEC, the Northeast chapter here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, will be inaugurating a mentorship program to help students of Indian and South Asian origin. This is for the medical students in the North Texas region and graduates of Indian Medical School who are looking for residency positions, fellowships, clinical and research observerships, and jobs. So for more opportunities and more information, you can send an email to mentorship@tipsnec.com. About 31 million people in the U.S. will be able to witness a rare event this spring that won't happen again for another 20 years. A total solar eclipse will occur briefly over a dozen states on the 8th of April, a month from today. It'll be the last total solar eclipse visible from the U.S. until the year 2044. The U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce is inviting you to the annual technology conference. It is happening on the 23rd of May, featuring keynote speaker Chakri Gautamukala, CEO and co-founder of O9 Solutions. You all can go ahead and get more information on the Chamber's website, which is USICOC, U.S. India Chamber of Commerce, .org. Also, would like for all of you to know that Pratham Dallas-Fort Worth chapter are having their annual gala on the 20th of April at the Omni Frisco Hotel with special guest Vidya Vox, the YouTuber and singer, and also Krish Dhanam, the speaker and author. We are thrilled to invite you to the 2024 Pratham Dallas-Fort Worth Gala, an extraordinary evening dedicated to empowering children and young people in India to transform their lives and communities, happening on Saturday the 20th of April at the Omni Frisco Hotel. And this year's gala theme is Changing Lives, Transforming Communities, highlighting the remarkable impact of Pratham's work in expanding access to quality learning opportunities. 360 shows, Diamond Productions, and 24/7 Entertainment are presenting Neetu Chandra as Umrao Jaan Ada. This is a musical play based on the novel written by Mirza Hadi Ruswa, a West End musical-style Broadway-style play coming to Dallas on the 26th and 27th of April. 3 shows with tickets available at Ticketmaster. And you can you can call Muhammad Abbas for more information. His number is 214-679-6818. And for the first time in American television history, PBS stations across the U.S. will show a new documentary film on Swami Vivekananda called America's First Guru. And that too, a first by an Indian origin documentary filmmaker. It'll be happening in May of this year. And we'll get you more details as we get close to that date. Ladies and gentlemen, that's your social calendar as it stands on this 8th of March. Happy International Women's Day to all the ladies out there. And for those of you celebrating Mahashivratri, aapko Mahashivratri ki shubhkamnaएं as we end our show for today right here on Community Radio Networks. Thank you very much for tuning in. You can see us live on YouTube as well as our website, which is CRN Community Radio Network, crn.guru. And the podcast is available all the time on 15 different platforms, including, of course, Apple Podcast, as well as Spotify, TuneIn Radio, and many other platforms that you can listen to us on. And for those of you that like to reach me directly, my number is 214-675-1754. You can also send me an email, smodgil, smodgil 5 @gmail.com. That's our show for today.